Luba never took her eyes off the TV. Although the show that was on board her, this was not why she was watching the TV. Luba was looking forward to the ad block when she would finally see the new videos with Lenya Golubkov. He reminded Luba of her husband so much. He was also an ordinary guy with 2 fake teeth and a not very well-paying job as an excavator driver. Only, unlike her husband Sergei, Lenya could buy his wife a fur coat, boots, and even a trip overseas to America. It was scary for Luba to even dream of such things. In the new video released, Lenya Golubkov told his wife Rita that he was going to buy his own excavator, and they would be able to live an even better life. The door to the room opened and Sergei entered, forcing Luba to turn around. There was a smile on his face. Luba looked at him irritably, asking him not to distract her from the advertisement she was watching. Sergei stood between the TV and the indignant Luba, but after a second, her face broke into a smile. Sergei waved his new MMM tickets in front of him. He had finally bought them. Luba burst into tears of joy. In her dreams, she had imagined how she would walk the streets of San Francisco in new boots, as Lenya Golubkov did. The unfortunate family did not understand what was actually ahead of them. And it all started back in 1989. The spirit of change was in the air at that time throughout Russia. The most freedom-loving citizens were looking forward to the collapse of the USSR and the opening of unprecedented opportunities. One such person was Sergei Mavrodi, who was still unknown to anyone at that time. In the hopes of getting rich, Sergei, together with his wife Olga Melnikova and his brother Vyacheslav Mavrodi, registered an enterprise company. Young Mavrodi gave the company a catchy, easy-to-remember name using the first letters of the founders' names, MMM. Initially, the enterprise's activity was completely harmless. Mavrodi bought computer equipment from other countries and sold it to the USSR. In 1992, a year after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Sergei faced his first setback. The police accused MMM of tax evasion. Because of this, the MMM Bank, created to serve Mavrodi's business, collapsed. The business became difficult and unprofitable. However, Sergei did not lose heart, and he shifted his attention to the financial sector. At first, he tries to offer shares of American companies to Russian investors, but this idea turns out to be ineffective. The thirst for success and enterprise will not allow Mavrodi to stop, and he decides to keep pushing further. In 1993, Mavrodi began to work with domestic shares and issue securities. He does everything in a completely legal manner and gets the opportunity to sell 991,000 shares. Mavrodi's paper shares entered a free circulation on February 1, 1994, and the par value of each hit 1,000 rubles. And then the great schemer began to scheme. He began to increase the prices for the sale and purchase of shares according to the principle, tomorrow will always be more expensive than today. And the psychological trick worked. Who wouldn't want to buy something that is guaranteed to rise in price tomorrow? The shares then sold like hotcakes. Buying them, each person imagined himself walking along the embankments of the best resorts in the world. It became clear to Mavrodi that millions of souls, hungry for quick and easy money, were getting caught on his hook. And who would stop dropping bait in when fish are biting? This was especially true given that fishing was the only thing Mavrodi said he enjoyed. And so he didn't stop. A genius and still a relatively law-abiding citizen, he decided to increase the volume of shares sold to 1 billion. But the state turned the young entrepreneur down, so he again had to limit himself to 991,000 securities. Mavrodi releases these measly shares, and again they sell faster than the new videos of Lenya Golubkov were being released. Then the evil and insidious mind of Mavrodi decides to kiss the law goodbye and starts playing dirty. The man issues his infamous MMM tickets. Formerly, they were worth 1/100th of the price of a share, but in reality, they were nothing more than a soap bubble of unfulfilled hopes for investors. The MMM tickets looked like Soviet banknotes, only instead of the ubiquitous portrait of Lenin, they were decorated with the appearance of Mavrodi himself. Over time, Mavrodi began to set prices for them twice a week, choosing arbitrary figures for this. What happened next is perfectly illustrated by one of the commercials, where Lenya Golubkov explains to the audience how MMM works. Lenya compares a financial pyramid with a huge pool of self-driving forces and mutual aid, only instead of running water, it is fed by cash flows. Whoever has extra money pours it into the pool, while those in need, on the contrary, draw from it. In practice, though, everything turned out to be much less poetic than this. The money, of course, poured in endless streams, but few people managed to take it back. And money was accumulated not in the so-called pool, but rather in a small 3-room apartment, which Sergei inherited. Millions of dollars were there, completely filling several rooms up to the ceiling. Usually, receiving such funds, a person immediately begins to spend them. He buys himself expensive yachts, cars, planes, extravagant mansions, and throws cool parties. Practically anyone would do this, but not Mavrodi. According to Sergei, the money for him was just paper. It probably came easy to say such things when the apartment is littered with such paper, but Mavrodi actually didn't spend anything from the money received through MMM. He despised those who put financial well-being at the forefront. Perhaps this was his way of punishing people for being greedy. Take, for example, one incident that occurred. Mavrodi's security guard told him about a homeless old man who had lost everything by investing in MMM tickets. The old man had settled in the entranceway next to the MMM office. He had nothing left. He was starving and cursed himself for the fact that his life turned out the way it did. Sergei took pity on the poor fellow and gave the old man about the same amount that he had lost. The old man was immensely grateful because it actually saved his life. However, after some time, he again found himself penniless in the same entrance. With all the money that Mavrodi gave him, the old man had bought MMM tickets and went bankrupt again. At least this is what Mavrodi himself said happened in his interview with Ukrainian journalist Dmitry Gordon. But is it really worth believing his words? After all, other people who were in contact with one of the greatest swindlers in history have had very unpleasant things to say about Mavrodi. Even the lawyer who defended Mavrodi at the trial called him an insensitive person and incapable of empathy. And Mavrodi's cellmate, who had shot women and children in Afghanistan, said that Mavrodi was the cruelest person he had ever seen. It's scary to imagine what would happen if a man like Mavrodi ever became president. But he could have. He had at least managed to become a deputy for the State Duma without any problems. However, his main motive was not the desire for power, but rather the avoidance of prison. Russian law enforcement officers wanted to stop Mavrodi as soon as his success started to explode. Only at that time, Russian legislation had nothing regarding financial pyramids at all, which meant that Mavrodi could freely accumulate money in his apartment. First, the government passed a law that was supposed to protect investors from false advertising, but this still didn't prevent Lenya Golubkov and his family from appearing on television. Then they decided to accuse Mavrodi of tax evasion. The Russian audience had never seen such a grandiose show. Oman, the Russian special police, invaded the MMM office on live television. Right in front of the camera, they detained the businessman and took out almost $700,000 in cash from the site. That was back in 1994, by the way. That same year, Mavrodi was passed into parliament, officially becoming a deputy and receiving full immunity. Achieving the support of the population in the elections turned out to be easy for the grand schemer, as he promised investors a 3,000% profit. Blinded by greed, investors not only rushed to hand over their money, but also put a mark on the ballot in front of Mavrodi's name. For 2 years, law enforcement tried to deprive Mavrodi of immunity. When they finally succeeded, Sergei decided to run for president. And what plans did he have? Perhaps promise all Russian citizens stock in MMM? No one will ever know. In order to prevent Mavrodi from becoming a presidential candidate, a criminal case was opened against him for allegedly forged signatures and documents. Then the case was closed, but it nevertheless succeeded in its main function, which was to prevent Mavrodi from participating in the elections. Granted, the businessman himself put forward a different version of why he never became president. According to Sergei, he was just too lazy to go through with it. He considered himself a homely kind of person, so the public role of the presidency did not appeal to him, although becoming the head of state could have been done without any problems. 2 years later, Mavrodi turns from being a successful businessman and aspiring politician to a fugitive. He soon gets put on the international wanted list. Still, the scammer masterfully managed to redirect investors' anger at the government up until MMM finally went bankrupt in 1997. In an interview with journalists, Mavrodi appears as a person who sincerely believes in his innocence. And all this despite the $110 billion of damage and 15 million affected investors, of which 50 committed suicide. For almost 5 years, Sergei was hiding from law enforcement agencies. While everyone was looking for him abroad, he sat in a rented apartment in Moscow. In February of 2003, the police broke into his house. They were speechless from what they saw. No, there was nothing terrible and bloody about it. What struck the police officers was something completely different. They could not understand how a person who owned billions of dollars could live in such poverty. There was old furniture, a Soviet-made Rubin TV, and nothing more. The empty rooms of his apartment could now be filled with criminal cases brought against Mavrodi. If all 650 volumes, each up to 270 pages thick, were stacked on top of each other, they would most definitely fill at least one room to the ceiling. Mavrodi finally gave up. He was sure that he would never get out of prison again. At that time, his wife was already a different girl, the winner of a beauty contest from the Ukrainian city of Zaporozhye. He did not want to torment his beautiful wife with eternal waiting, so he let her go. Sergei himself waited for the verdict, which was announced only 4 years later, in 2007. When Mavrodi heard the verdict, he couldn't believe his ears. A full-scale hunt had been conducted for him for 5 whole years, and the whole government dreamed of putting Mavrodi behind bars. Only the charges lasted all of 4.5 years. Sergei had spent most of this term in a pre-trial detention center. Thus, after the verdict was finally announced, he had less than a month to spend in prison. And guess what Mavrodi did when he was free, now having an indelible reputation as a swindler and con? That's right, new financial pyramid schemes. He devoted his entire life to them up until 2018, when he died from a heart attack. So who was Sergei Mavrodi really? A brilliant swindler? A naive idealist who wanted to change the world? Or a heartless psychopath? Share your opinion on this in the comments below.